Suddenly, a young man jumps up in bed, sweating and breathing heavily. It is Michael. He is now in his early 20s and was reliving a terrible moment in his past. He shakes his head and sits up. He just sits there for a moment staring at the floor, then shakes his head again as if to snap out of it, and stands up and puts on his clothes. The bedroom walls have damp-stained wallpaper that is peeling off the walls in the corners of the room. The blanket-covered window slightly lets the sun break through, showing dust floating in the air as it passes through the beams of sunlight. Michael looks into a broken mirror on the wall, then looks deep into his eyes, and then the tattoo on his forehead. His attention focuses on something in the mirror, and he can see a medallion hanging on the wall behind him. He places the medallion on his pocket and leaves the room. He walks down to a dark, thin corridor, and comes to a door to his left, and a door to his right slightly ajar. He enters the room to his right, can see a tin bath, some buckets, an old porcelain sink which is full of warm water. Michael begins to wash his face. Suddenly the door swings open, and a girl bumps into Michael, making him bump his head on the sink. "Ow!" shouts Michael. "Oh no, I'm so sorry, Michael," she replies. She rushes to inspect his head as he looks into the mirror inspecting himself. "I'm so sorry. You're not hurt bad, are you?" Mike is still looking in the mirror, trying to hide his pain. Rebecca touches his head to inspect for a bump. "Ouch! God damn it, woman!" he replies. Rebecca jumps back and smiles nervously, smiling at Michael as she kneels down to pick up some buckets and biting her lips so not to laugh. She looks at Michael, then leaves the room. "Maybe next time you could knock," Michael says, looking at the door, frowning, and then hastily picks up a towel to dry his face, accidentally rubs his sore spot on his head. "Ow!" Michael leaves the bathroom and enters a small room opposite. It is very brightly lit, with orange walls and a pink carpet. There are plants surrounding all four large windows, and are pictures all over the walls. And sat on the floor of the room and surrounded by various toys are 12 strange-looking children, all with their heads out of proportion to their bodies. They are sat motionless, cross-legged on the floor, facing the same direction, their eyes large, wide open and vacant. Rebecca and the other woman are speaking to a beautiful woman with long blonde hair, wearing a long lilac dress. It is Sam. She is giving instructions to the other woman on how to take care of the children. "There you are," Sam says. She walks over to Michael and throws her arms round him and kisses him on the lips as she stands on her toes to reach him. The two women then go to the children to prepare them for their breakfast. "We got to get some more bread. We've run out," Sam says. "Yeah, okay," Mike replies. Sam pulls Michael by the hand and says goodbye to the other two women. "See you later." They leave the front door of the house and walk down some concrete steps leading down to the street. There is a roadblock to their left with two armed commune guards protecting it. Sam and Michael head down the street. The alleyway next to Sam and Michael's house is partially blocked by an old school bus which the commune folk have been doing up for her but is still not running. Sam and Michael are no longer living in the desert, but now live in part of a large city. The whole city is an estate, toppled buildings, half-stood and derelict buildings, craters and holes in the roads. After the Great Global War and the natural disasters that shook the planet, bringing a stop to the war and the world to its knees, hardly a city on the planet as well as people within survived. Typhoons, tornadoes, earthquakes, tidal waves, the whole planet suffered a complete natural Armageddon. This city, however, is home to over 1,000 people, those who survived the disasters and lives which never saw Earth when it was at its peak of civilization. All they have now are the stories passed down to them and the remnants of civilization they live amongst. The city could potentially house thousands of people, but inner-city conflict, hunger and disease are major life-taking factors. Although most of the city is without power and its pre-21st century way of living, people still live where they can, and in the past decade since the disasters, the city folk have rebuilt and restored parts of the city. The area in which a new city commune is within is not too bad, as most of the buildings within it are safe, and major work has been done to build new small dwellings and farms on an old city park. Sam and Michael walk along the road, holding hands, and head towards the city commune. "Are you okay?" says Sam. "Yeah, just a bad night," replies Michael. "The nightmares?" "Yeah, and that idiot Rebecca burst into the bathroom and made me bang my head on the sink." Sam smirks. "Oh, my poor baby," she says. "It's not funny, she almost knocked me out." They are just about to enter the commune when a woman carrying a basket calls out to them. "Morning, Sam. Morning, Mike." Mike raises his hand and Sam replies, "Oh, hiya, Sarah." The lady smiles and enters a building. The city commune is built on an old park and looks like a small village. Many of the buildings in it are a single story and have large windows running along the entire front of them at an angle, sloping upwards to capture most sunlight. Most have solar panels and windmills on top of them to harness the sun and wind for power, and along with the gardens full of vegetables, herbs and animals, Food is also grown within the buildings, in the window bays and also on the roofs. Surrounding the commune are pre-war disaster buildings, townhouses, apartment buildings and towers. Most still stand, but some are dangerous and derelict at the risk of collapsing. This, however, doesn't stop some people inhabiting them. Michael and Sam walk through the commune gardens and come to the marketplace. The traders are setting up their stalls. A big built hearty man calls out to Sam. "Morning, Sam. Michael." "Hiya. How are the kids getting on, alright?" "Oh yes, Tim is starting to take his food a lot better. He can chew now." "Well, I never. It's all that effort you put in, my dear." The market man leads towards Sam and beckons her to come closer, which she does. "I'll tell you what, dear. You come by later and I'll chuck an extra apple in your bag. We'll see how Tim gets on with that." "Oh, thank you, Mr. Stunton," Sam replies, and with that she kisses him on the nose and skips off. "Bye then, love." Michael and Mr. Stunton trade smiles, and then Michael catches up with Sam, who is entering the commune hall. They walk in to see a woman behind a counter reading a letter. "Oh, hello, you two." The lady turns around, getting some paper slips out of some pigeonhole shelving. "Here's your food credits. Oh, and Michael, Mrs. Tom needs some boxes lifted, and I said you would help." "Okay, thank you. Come on, Mike, off to Mrs. Tom's we go," Sam says. They leave the commune hall and get onto the road. "I'll race you to Mrs. Tom's. There's the place up there," says Sam. Michael starts to reply to Sam, "Sam, you know," then Sam screams, "Go!" She runs off holding onto her dress. Mike begins to run, shouting after her, "Oi, you cheater!" Sam is leading and wearing a big grin. Mike catches up with her and she begins to scream and laugh. She hits out at him and he grabs her and tickles her ribs until she falls to the floor laughing. "Ah! Stop it! Michael! Stop it!" Michael laughs and runs off to Mrs. Tom's front door and starts doing a victory dance to wind her up. Sam blows her hair away from her face and screws her face up at Michael. She picks herself up from the floor and marches towards Michael, who is grinning his head off. "Ah, poor baby," Michael says. Sam then kicks him in the shin. "Ow!" Sam points to Mrs. Tom's door with a frown. "Go on, knock on the door, you cheat," she says. Michael, rubbing his shin, looks up at Sam, who is looking all serious, with her arms on her hips. "You're just a bad loser," Michael says. Sam begins to slap Michael like a cat paw fighting. Michael then knocks on the door and grabs hold of her and begins to tickle her again. "Michael," Sam says through gritted teeth as she struggles to break free. "Who is it? What's going on out there?" an old voice says from behind the door. "It's only Michael and Sam, Mrs. Tom's," replies Mike. "Oh, hold on then, dear." Mrs. Tom's undoes the locks and then begins to open the door. Mike lets go of Sam and stands up straight, presenting himself to Mrs. Tom's. Sam is red in the face, quickly tries to tidy and compose herself. Mike walks in, followed by Sam. "Oh dear, are you okay, Sam? You look all hot and bothered," says Mrs. Tom's. Sam looks at Michael with a frown. Michael shrugs his shoulders and looks at Mrs. Tom as if he hasn't got a clue why Sam is looking at him in that way. Mrs. Tom smiles, shakes her head and begins to close the door. "I don't know. Kids," Mrs. Tom says. It is later on in the morning and Sam and Michael are leaving Mrs. Tom's. "Thank you ever so much, my dears," says Mrs. Tom's. "That's okay, Mrs. Tom's. Any time. You take care, okay?" Sam replies. "Yes, I will do, and you two do so too. Bye then, dear. Bye, Michael." They wave each other goodbye, and Sam and Michael walk through the commune gardens together, towards the marketplace. Sam holds on to Michael's hands and looks up at him. "Michael, can we go and sit on the hill together, please?" Michael looks down at her and smiles. "Sure, we can go for a while, I suppose," he replies. They walk through the marketplace, which is fairly busy. People are going about their business and getting their provisions and chatting to one another. They walk along the side of a long building and come to a large hill made of cleared rubble, which has grass growing on its various places. At the bottom of this rubble pile is a pond has formed, and the water runs down the hill. Bricks and stones are placed in the pond to form a pathway with stepping stones. Sam lets go of Michael's hand and begins to step over the stones. "Come on, Michael," she says. Michael begins to step from stone to stone across the pond. Sam is waiting at the base of the hill as Michael jumps to the last stone and stumbles and slips into the pond. He is ankle deep in water. He then jumps out where Sam is stood and shakes his feet. "Come on, clumsy. We'll sit at the top and you can take your shoes off. The sun will dry them out," says Sam. They climb the hill and sit down. Michael begins to take his shoes and socks off. Sam is looking over the commune. She looks over at the school and sees all the children running around playing together. She sighs. Michael stops bringing his socks out and turns around to look at her. She is sat hugging her knees. "Look at those children playing, running, screaming and shouting. I just wish Tim and the other children could do that. Every night I go to bed and pray that I'll wake up and they'll be stood up, ready to face the world. But they can't do nothing for themselves. They just sit down facing the same direction. Sometimes I can see why their parents abandoned them and disowned them, but I just can't leave them to die. It's not their fault they are different from other people. It's the way God made them. Michael puts his arms around Sam and kisses her on her head as she buries her face in her knees. Shh, hey beautiful, this isn't you talking. Come on, let's get you home. I'll get the bread and supplies. Michael and Sam stand up, and they hug, and begin to walk down the hill. We see Michael again as a child. He is stood in the old Desert Commune school building, looking up at someone in a white cloak. The figure kneels down to make eye contact with Michael. It is Hoto. Hoto puts his hand on Michael's shoulder and looks at him in the eyes. They both exchange warm smiles. Hoto puts his hands down his cloak towards his chest and pulls out a medallion. Michael, I am giving this to you, says Hoto. Michael looks at it in awe. Hoto waves it in front of Michael's face, and Michael can see his reflection in the different coloured segments of the medallion. You are special, Michael. Hoto passes the medallion to Michael, who holds on to it in both hands. Michael then gently bites onto his bottom lip as Hoto takes the medallion and begins to hang it around Michael's neck. As long as you hold it. Michael then holds onto the medallion in the palms of his hands, and as it hangs from his neck, I will always be with you, Hoto says. Hoto's face then appears like a hologram in the medallion, and then the medallion begins to emit a light so bright that Michael has to close his eyes. And when he opens them, they are not in the classroom, they are stood in the desert. Army vehicles drive past them. Michael looks around shocked, then looks up at Hoto, who smiles and kneels down and places his hand on Michael's shoulder. I will not be around here for much longer, my child, but I am not choosing to leave you, says Hoto. Hoto swishes his cloak over Michael. They are both surrounded by light. Hoto glides to his feet and stands by Michael, placing his hands on Michael's shoulders. Michael takes his eyes off of Hoto and looks forward. His face is struck by an expression of amazement and fear. They are in a desert with a huge domed structure in the distance ahead of them. A great battle is going on around them. Aircraft of various shapes fighting and crashing to the ground. Robots shooting, and men and Soltarians in suits of armour running and shooting at tanks, robots and other men in armour. You must remember, be strong, Michael. Never forget what I have taught you, says Hoto. Suddenly, a great beam of light shoots down from the sky and is tearing up the landscape. The beam of light hurtles towards Michael and Hoto, tearing up everything in its path. Your heart is your greatest power, Michael, your mind your greatest weapon, greater than any machine. Then as the beam hurtles towards them, Hoto puts his hands together and begins to meditate. Light rushes through his body. Michael anxiously looks up at him, then at the approaching beam of light. Greater than any weapon, says Hoto. A bubble then appears around Michael and Hoto, and a beam tears over the bubble, with Hoto and Michael safe inside. Michael looks behind Hoto and sees the beam continue to tear up the landscape before retreating back up into the sky. The ground around them is destroyed, but the ground they were stood on, in the bubble, is fine. Hoto swishes his cloak around Michael. They both exchange warm smiles, then there is a mighty flash of light.